Hi, everyone. Let me get it. My name is Lisa Fernberg. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Baltimore City, and it is my honor to be able to introduce our guest tonight. In December of 2020, Bill Henry became Baltimore City's first new comptroller in over 25 years. As comptroller, he sits on several city boards and commissions, including the Board of Estimates, the Board of Finance, the Architectural and Engineering Commission, and the Board of Trustees for the city's pension systems. We'll hear more from Bill in just a few moments about the role and responsibilities of the comptroller's office. And as Laura said, it's pretty cool and pretty nerdy, so get excited. Before being elected comptroller, Bill Henry served 3 terms representing me and my neighbors and all of the Baltimore's 4th district on the city council. During those years, Bill overhauled Baltimore's housing policies, passed a comprehensive plastic bag reduction law, and fought for numerous charter reforms that voters overwhelmingly approved. Before City Council, Bill spent several years revitalizing neighborhoods in Southeast Baltimore with the Patterson Park Community Development Corporation, held many staff positions in City Hall and in Annapolis, and also worked in the private sector as a community relations and organizational development consultant. Bill is a lifelong city resident, a graduate of Johns Hopkins and Loyola Universities, and currently lives in Radnor-Winston neighborhood with his wife and their 2 daughters. Hello, yes. Bill Henry, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate some of the commentary on it. I have to be honest. I didn't listen to the whole intro because I was really enjoying the expressions.
And she steals the show.
She's hilarious. I will disclaim for everyone at the beginning of this, I am, despite my virtual background, I'm doing this from home, and there's a warning, I am bracketed. I have this room to myself, but the room on that side has 1 daughter in it, and the room on that side has another daughter in it. They're doing their own things and probably won't interact with us, but doing their own thing sometimes means sudden bursts of laughter or yelling. And if so, don't worry if I suddenly go, that's just me responding to life at home. I have a PowerPoint here because I understand there was a strong desire to have me have a PowerPoint. I will also disclaim, I don't like doing PowerPoint presentations. It's an aversion left over from business school, and I apologize for that. It takes me back to a sensitive time in my life. But here, let me see if I can bring this up.
And we do have your questions for our conversational way of doing it. So you can let me know if you'd like me to jump in now to get started, or if you want to start and then I'll jump in with questions.
I think what we can do is, if you want to jump in for questions, and here I'll again just letting everybody know, the PowerPoint presentation is really more so that after this is over, it's taking notes for you. So if there is stuff that you were particularly interested in knowing about how Baltimore city government is put together and some of the details of the comptroller's office, you'll have this PowerPoint presentation. I'm gonna try to just talk. And so what I say may not line up exactly with the stuff on the screen, but you'll have that there for you afterwards if you want it. So let's go ahead and you can do the questions, and I'll advance the slides and we'll see how closely how my answers actually match up with the real and official program.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's start out with what is the comptroller and what departments fall under your jurisdiction?
Okay, so we actually a little bit of this got covered in the intro. The comptroller is one of the 3 citywide elected officials. In the past, it had more responsibilities for the financial activities of Baltimore city government. That's in keeping with the similarly named controller in a lot of private companies that is the person who handles the finances. There was a mayoral power grab about 60 years ago. If the name Theodore McKeldin means anything to anybody, back in the early 60s, McKeldin got elected to be mayor. The same year, a guy named Hyman Pressman got elected to be comptroller. And since Hyman Pressman was a pretty well-known gadfly, constantly complaining about the way that the boys who run the town were doing things, the boys who run the town reached out and took most of the actual financial operations away from the controller at the beginning of Pressman's term in office. So things like procurement, accounts payable, the budget, all this used to be under the controller, and they moved it away. And basically, what they turned the office into went well with Pressman's personality. They turned it into a watchdog position. So the Department of Audits reports to the controller, along with the Department of Real Estate, which monitors the acquisition and disposition of whenever property comes into the city's possession or whenever we're selling it to somebody for some reason. While the decision to do so and a lot of the mechanics of it have been stripped away by the mayor over the years, it still has to come through real estate for an approval in the middle of the pipeline. The other two departments that report to the comptroller are telecommunications and the municipal post office. And a lot of people will say, what on earth do telecommunications and the municipal post office have to do with the controller? And I would say not very much. We haven't been able to find anything in writing, but the municipal post office and the Department of Telecommunications, which used to be called the Municipal Telephone Exchange or the switchboard, as far as we can tell, both of those offices used to be substantially larger just because in, up through the 60s, that sending things by mail was the big way to get information conveyed. And the Municipal Telephone Exchange had to do a lot of things using actual people because the technology hadn't been advanced to the point it is right now. We think what happened was they gave the controller those two departments literally because they were additional patronage positions to make up for the staff that had been in the bigger operating agencies like purchasing and accounts payable. And so we think it was just to kind of ease the pain of having the financial powers stripped away. So those four agencies come under the controller. And also, I think Lisa mentioned this, the controller by charter sits on the Board of Estimates and the Board of Finance, and also on the boards of trustees for all of the city's retirement systems and plans.
And we want to dig a little bit more into the Board of Estimates, the hot topic of the last couple of years, I would say, in the news. And for those who might be a little less familiar, if you could give just a brief overview of the Board of Estimates. And then the question we're interested in digging into is how things end up on the Board of Estimates agenda.
Sure. The Board of Estimates, most people don't realize this, but the Board of Estimates is really the actual government of Baltimore City. They're the policy making board that actually is the city for a lot of legal and practical purposes. The city council is the legislative branch. The mayor and the controller are both part of the executive branch. But when you start talking about who actually commits the city to contracts and where decisions of policy for city government are set, most of that is done at the Board of Estimates. There are 5 members, the mayor, the council president, the comptroller, but then the other 2 members are not elected officials. The other 2 members are the city solicitor and the director of public works, both of whom work for the mayor. So for those of you keeping track at home, on a 5-member board, the mayor controls 3 of the votes, because the people who work for the mayor very rarely vote against what the mayor wants at the Board of Estimates. In fact, to the best of my knowledge, it's only happened once in the last 30 years. And they tabled it and basically re-voted the next week, and the city solicitor changed his vote, having had his job clearly dangled over him in the interim. So whenever you hear people talk about Baltimore has a strong mayor system of government, the Board of Estimates construction is what makes it a strong mayor system. We have a very similarly organized city called St. Louis, Missouri. In fact, St. Louis and Baltimore are the only 2 remaining cities that aren't in counties in the United States of America. When I was in college, there were 6, and now there are 2, because in most places, the city and the surrounding counties have found a way to merge or come together. But St. Louis is very similar to Baltimore in that it is a standalone city, and it is run by a Board of Estimates, and I believe theirs is called Board of Estimates and Apportionment. But the reason why St. Louis is often described as having a weak mayor system is because their Board of Estimates is just the mayor, the council president, and the comptroller. So the mayor can't be certain of getting their way on any decision that comes before the board. They have to ally with either the comptroller or the council president to make sure that they can pass something. Whereas here in Baltimore, the mayor has all the votes that the mayor needs to pass anything they want at any time.
And in terms of what you're actually making decisions about, how do things end up on the agenda for something that the Board of Estimates has to decide?
Sure, do that. So here's the Board of Agenda process. This is one where I'm going to not try to read everything in there, but just say, generally speaking, if you're an agency like the Department of Public Works and you have a contract that you want approved to rebuild a bridge, there are a couple of things that happen before it gets to the Board of Estimates. It has to be reviewed by the Architectural and Engineering Commission, and then the first step on this one, because this is true for really everything, then the contract has to be reviewed by the law department for form and legal sufficiency. It has to be reviewed by the audits department to make certain that we're going to be able to confirm afterwards that everything we need to do if we're auditing this contract is going to be available to us. And it needs to be approved by the BBMR, as the Bureau of Budget Management and Research, which is basically just the finance department saying, yes, there is enough money allocated in the budget for you to pay this contract at the time that you're expecting to pay it, so you're good to go. Once all of those things have happened, they go to the mayor's office, because at the end of the day, the mayor is the one who's going to be responsible for defending this. And then they get submitted to the comptroller's office, the comptroller being the secretary to the Board of Estimates. So our office physically puts together the agenda each week. And each item that some agency wants approved is usually a page or part of a page or several pages on an agenda that can be, I think the shortest one we've seen so far was 44 pages, and a long one is going to be in the 130, 140 pages. And so each week that gets compiled based on what gets submitted to us by 11 o'clock on Tuesday mornings. And then the work of critical reviewer starts for us. And so a big chunk of my week is taking all the items that are on the board's agenda for the following week, going through them with my staff and trying to figure out if everything is okay. You know, in the big contracts from DPW and DOT and general services, are they following the rules for minority and women's business enterprises? Are they meeting the goals that have been set by the Minority Women's Business Opportunities Office? Are they in line time-wise? Are they on track to finish this contract? A lot of the things that come to us are contract extensions. You know, why did they need it? And so what we end up doing is we end up having a lot of briefings with city agencies on the Monday and Tuesday before each Wednesday's board meeting, where they walk us through the item and explain to us anything we have questions about, which generally speaking are things we think people would have questions about, because we want to make sure that when this comes to the board on Wednesday morning, if we're passing it, it's because we feel most people would be okay with this and would and understand why we're doing what we're doing. A lot of times, usually at least once or twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week, there will be something that we will put on what they call the non-routine agenda. And that means we purposefully want to have some open discussion on that item at the board meeting. So if you tune in on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. to watch a Board of Estimates meeting, most of what you're watching in terms of conversation are the items that either my office or the council president's office had questions about and wanted to make sure were aired out publicly.
Thanks. And in a little bit, we'll definitely want to dive into questions of where, as advocates, can we insert ourselves into that conversation, and where is there opportunity for change? There were specifically some questions that have come up that we're going to put in the parking lot.
But before we move on, I do feel obliged to show this slide that Casey in my office put together to show off who the board members actually are. She had actually used a different picture for me that I don't like that as much as I like this picture. So I swapped it. I took my my expensive MBA PowerPoint skills and I put them to use, swapping in a picture I like better from election night in 2016. And so I just wanted to share this before we move on to, well, if you are interested in following the Board of Estimates directly, these are the ways that you can watch it live on the internet. You can also watch it on cable channel 25 if you're in Baltimore City and you have Comcast cable. And then here are some other ways to be involved. You can get on the list to have information emailed to you as part of a blast each week if you sign up with our office.
Sounds good. So we wanted to bring you in to have all this talk about the Board of Estimates, because our ultimate interest for this evening is on infrastructure. And of course, the physical spaces that we build all around us are the city. And sometimes we lose sight of that. But of course, everything related to economic and racial justice and social justice in our city has to exist in a physical space. And how we build that space tells us who we are. And There's a lot of talk, of course, nationally about infrastructure right now. And what even infrastructure is could be a question because it's being defined differently. So we wanted to hear from you when it comes to the city and people say the word infrastructure, what is it? It looks like you've got a list up there. Is there anything you want to say about it?
So I was I was thinking about this one as I was going through the PowerPoint, and I don't know how many of you remember Schoolhouse Rock, but one of the videos from Schoolhouse Rock was for nouns. You know, what is a noun? And I'm not sure if this is in the lyrics, but it was. I think there was something like, if you can point at it, it's a noun. And that is kind of how I feel about infrastructure, although I'd be tempted to say, if you can put graffiti on it, it's municipal infrastructure. So pretty much everything the city builds and hopefully tries to maintain is part of our municipal infrastructure. Some of it is a little bit more nuanced than that, like major software systems probably don't get thought of as infrastructure, but they are. We treat demolition as a capital project. So in a weird sort of way, the need to demolish buildings is a weird kind of part of our infrastructure.
I would say
And
that's
then,
part of maintenance over time, right? Like
right,
things have to change.
and we'll get into in a little bit the deferred maintenance aspect of this for the city. I have often discussed with my community associations back when I was on the council. People are almost always unhappy with how high our water bills are in Baltimore City, and that unhappiness is regularly accentuated by the fact that we keep raising them. And one of the things that has been unpleasant to try to explain over the last decade or so is that most of our water and wastewater system was built right after the Great Fire of Baltimore back in the early 1900s. And so that means most of that core infrastructure is now a little over 100 years old. And so it is my unpleasant duty to tell people that the water and wastewater infrastructure that was built in the early 1900s had a usable lifespan of about 75 to 100 years. Now, what we should have done is had a good proactive maintenance plan where we set money aside so that as we got into the 50 to 75 year range, we could start swapping stuff out pretty regularly before it collapsed. But at that time, the money that the city charged for water and sewer, that money went into the general fund, not into a special fund to maintain the water and wastewater system. So for the first 70 some years of the water and wastewater system's history, the money would come in and it would get spent on all the rest of these things, because these things are all above ground and people notice if they're not there or if they're in bad repair. But the water and wastewater system was underground and no one could see it. So it wasn't really at the top of people's lists of what to spend this year's money on. So we didn't waste the money. We used the money to build sidewalks and schools and libraries and parks and rec centers. But what we didn't do with it is do the maintenance that we needed to do to our water and wastewater system. So I think it was Schaefer in the late 70s, early 80s, created a enterprise fund for water and wastewater. So now when we pay our water bill, when we pay our sewer bill, that money goes into a lockbox so that it can only be spent on the operations and maintenance of the water and wastewater system. The problem is that we now have like 75 years of deferred maintenance. And the only way we can pay for it is to borrow big chunks of money to do maintenance work on the water system, and then pay that back using the receipts every year of the water and wastewater bills. And that's why we've been raising rates for several years now, because mayors didn't want to raise rates because it makes people mad. And so lots of mayors in our lifetime kicked this can down the road. It wasn't until about 10 years ago, I think it was actually Sheila Dixon that started it, and then Stephanie Rawlings Blake continued it. They said we can't kick the can any further down the road. We need to start raising more money so that we can do more infrastructure, at least with the water and sewer. And so that's why we are where we are today.
And does infrastructure all generally get paid for out of the general fund, as you mentioned, or are there different ways to pay for different kinds of infrastructure? Obviously, like schools, for example, I think are something where the state jumps in for some amount of it.
So let me see if I can do this concisely. The water and wastewater is the only real capital expense we do where there is a dedicated funding source that really pays for almost all of it. Or more accurately, I guess the fairer way to say it is that we don't bother to subsidize it with additional general funds. We try to do everything we're going to do within what we're receiving from water and wastewater bills. There is a little bit of money for capital construction for schools coming in from the container tax. The container tax revenue, some people may remember from about 10 years ago when we had the fight over creating that. That revenue is dedicated to paying for the city's share of capital improvements and maintenance for schools. But everything else, DGS, Rec and Parks, BSIT, HCD, transportation, the solid waste side of DPW, if there's infrastructure or capital needs, that all gets paid for out of the general fund. We float general obligation bonds every 2 years, and you see those on your general election ballot. You see bond questions that you're going to be asked to approve, and what you're being asked to approve is the city borrowing big pots of money to do these big capital improvements on our infrastructure, and then we're going to pay those bonds off over 20 some years using general fund revenue each year.
Thanks for sharing that. We have 2 more general questions, and then folks have a lot of questions kind of diving in on the specific water and sewage infrastructure. But one of them is, besides water and sewage, what are some of the current problems with our infrastructure in Baltimore?
So we got this list from the planning department, which maintains the capital budget. Every year they go through with all of the agencies who have capital needs. They vet all of the requests, and then based on what the finance department has told them they're allowed to spend, they put together a capital budget request. This is, by their account, the deferred maintenance for each of these 5 agencies or areas of city need. In terms of the agencies have added up everything they really need money for, things that need to be done, and all these requests, if all the requests were put in and approved, we would spend $2.7 billion on the deferred capital needs of just these 5 city agencies. To put this in perspective, we generally spend a total of between $300 and $600 million a year on capital improvements.
Sure. And then our last general question is kind of the big ticket. Now we have all this information and there's also a national infrastructure plan. So can you talk about how that could specifically affect Baltimore? And I know this may or may not be part of your presentation, but from our particular take, as advocates for social, racial, and economic justice in the city, are there points where we can advocate for that money to be used in ways that are giving people equal access to any kind of new infrastructure being built or things being fixed and maintained?
So the best way I can sum that up would be to say, if you have ways to influence the governor has a great deal of discretion over how the state spends the money it's going to get from the federal infrastructure plan. Based on the formula funding that we're aware of, Maryland's going to get about $4.1 billion in federal highway aid, and another $400 million for bridge replacement and repairs over the next 5 years. We don't have any details yet on how much Baltimore will get specifically. But if you figure the state is going to end up having somewhere in the range of $5 billion, we're going to hope that Baltimore City gets at least about 400 million of that. So if you go back to this chart here of $2.7 billion worth of need, that's where I would expect that money to be spent. If you wanted to advocate inside Baltimore City for how that money gets to be spent, I would focus that advocacy squarely on the mayor's office, because we've seen now how they are running the distribution of the American Rescue Plan stimulus money, and they are running that entirely out of the mayor's office. They got one big general approval to spend it as part of the budget from the city council, and now all of the spending of that $600 million of stimulus money, all of that is going to be determined by the mayor and his people. So that's where you should focus your advocacy.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the presentational part of our evening. We can go into the just question and answer part of our evening, if you're ready to do that.
Was there a screen I should leave up? Was there a general slide I should have?
No, we'll just have your beautiful face. So there were quite a few questions that came into the chat related specifically to water and sewage, so I wanted to highlight those. The first one being, there was a lot of talk around individuals and water rates, and we're paying so much money and the reason why those prices have gone up. What we didn't hear from you was the justification raising those rates while we know about the problem with the underbuilding of commercial customers and the high income condos, and if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so our billing system is pretty crappy, and which is especially disturbing to have to acknowledge, considering we just bought a new one a couple years ago and spent millions of dollars on it. One of the things that I committed to when I was running for this job, and recognizing that this job does not give me the ability to pick up the phone and order the director of DPW to do anything in particular, but I can pick up the phone and tell the city auditor what I'd like him to look into. And so we have spent the first part of the year trying to figure out how we can work a comprehensive performance audit of the city's water billing system into the schedule of audits for the coming year. We are almost done with the scope of that. We're hoping to get the audit started, if not this summer, then very, very early this fall, with the hope of having it completed either by the end of this calendar year or early in the beginning of 2022. We are working cooperatively with the administration. They have promised us their full cooperation and full access, and we're hoping that they live up to that. And we want to find out exactly what is wrong with the water billing system. The other sad and, to use an old expression now, inconvenient truth is that the fact that we are making billing mistakes and not billing some people who need to be billed, while that's entirely true and needs to be rectified, it is statistically unlikely that the underbilling or unbilling is going to have a significant impact on total revenue, to the point where we don't have to continue to have high rates for water and sewer, because the whole point is I could go back to that chart that shows there's $1.5 billion of deferred maintenance to our water and wastewater system. And, if you borrow $100 million a year to try to get at that, by the time you get through it, there will be more. So the trick is, how do you have such a high level of work that you're getting through the deferred maintenance before there's more deferred maintenance that needs to be done? And if you're going to do hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of work every year, we're going to have significant debt service to pay back for that each year. And that's why the rates are going to, I say that mainly because I am aware of absolutely no reason or situation under which rates would ever come down.
Right. On that kind of a front, a related question that came in, and maybe you have an idea or opinion based on your experience and positionality. From an advocacy standpoint, would you see that there's a way that we could get other organizations or corporations, large nonprofits, whatever it might be, to pay to alleviate some of this cost from low-income Baltimoreans?
So before I touch on that, I will say I did leave out one important piece of advocacy, which is, honest to God, this federal infrastructure plan. I'm walking this uncomfortable line between being glad that we're going to get a couple $100 million of federal money that we didn't have. So yay, that's good. But I was actually disappointed by the relatively small size of the infrastructure plan, given the need.
Yeah.
this plan could have been twice what it is and still would not have substantially changed the dynamic, because and this is where I'll come to the point of it would be its own worthwhile campaign to basically create a separate philanthropy channel around helping people who are challenged in paying for their water and wastewater bills. You know, I can see it being its own thing to come up with a philanthropic campaign to get businesses and wealthy individuals to, you know, give money towards that that cause. The other way to approach it is to take a more progressive attitude towards how government should do it, in the same sort of way that we have, you know, progressive income taxes, where the more you make, you know, the higher rate you pay, and the less you make, the lower rate you pay. You know, we have looked at that as an option for water bills. We passed a bill in the last council to create a program with the water department that would provide a sort of attempt at making the water, what you actually pay, dependent on your income. And then what would effectively happen is people with higher incomes would be paying what would effectively be a slightly larger rate, and subsidizing people who have lower incomes, which right now is how all other city services are paid for, because when you're paying them out of property taxes, if you've got an expensive house, you're paying more than someone who has a less expensive house.
And is the consent decree on the water system still in place?
Oh, with the feds?
What is
Yeah.
the status of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it under bill, or let me see.
Under bill?
Nope, that was something I copied and I realized. Oh, is it under you? Do you manage that at all?
Oh, no. No, I mean, for, I guess if you want to say managing it, the Department of Public Works manages it. You know, they're the ones with the responsibility of meeting the benchmarks in the decree. And
And
I mean,
responsible for keeping them accountable.
Yeah, but I'll be fair, that would technically be my responsibility, but I've watched as a council person, DPW, I mean, it's in DPW's interest to meet the consent decree. Like for them, the consent decree is something that they can take to the budget bureau with their annual requests and say, hey, if we don't meet this by such and such date, we're going to be paying the feds a fine of this many $1 million. So it is worth it for you to give us more money so we can do this. The DPW has no incentive not to meet the consent decree, and every incentive to do so. Holding them accountable for that is not a challenge.
Sure. I want to make sure we have some time for the questions that came in about power on the Board of Estimates generally. Specifically, quite a few people asked, is there a way for us to actually change that power dynamic on the Board of Estimates? If so, you know, what do you think about that?
That it's a tough one. Over the years, I've been working in and out of City Hall now for over 30 years. I get a good laugh out of the fact that the elevator that or the stairs that drop me off at my office. If I turn one way, I'm going into my current office. If I turn the other direction, I go into the part of the mayor's office where I interned as a junior in college back in the late 80s. So I feel like 30 plus years and I basically have moved across the hall. But in all that time, I've spent a lot of time talking with people about the relative merits of a strong mayor system or a weak mayor, strong council system. One of the people I talked the most with was Mary Pat Clark, who I worked for and then worked with. And Mary Pat's belief in the strong mayor system stemmed from the fact that you only have to make sure you elect one good person to be mayor. And with a strong council, you've got to make sure that you elect, in our case now, 8 good council people to make sure that you get the same effect. And you can't guarantee. She thinks it's easier to make sure we get one good mayor. What I have focused on is not trying to eliminate the strong mayor system. I've focused on things that would sort of tweak that balance. For example, right now we're doing rules and regs for the Board of Estimates. There's the Board of Estimates has never had formal rules or bylaws. They've just sort of run. And so we've been pushing the council president and the administration to codify some rules and put them in place. And one of the things that we've suggested is that anything that's out of place, like out of the ordinary, like calling a special meeting or limiting public debate, or enacting a resolution of policy that the whole city is going to follow. We suggested that those things should have a 4/5 supermajority required when we do them. And the idea would be that neither the council president nor the comptroller could do them on their own, or even if they work together, but the mayor would have to have the agreement of one of the other 2 citywide elected officials if we're going to take that approach. And we thought that that was a very fair thing to do. It didn't really eliminate the strong mayor power. The mayor still is passing everything of regular day-to-day work and conventional importance with the majority vote that could be theirs alone if they need it. But for those things, we thought, those things that are out of the ordinary, we thought it would be good for Baltimore to show that there was something closer to consensus. And frankly, we've gotten resistance from that. Law department said flatly, everything should be majority vote. They asked us to pull the regs off the agenda so that we could talk about it for a couple weeks. And so we're going to have a meeting and we're going to talk about it. But that's an example of like the little tweaks that we could do. If you want to do big tweaks, I mean, you could switch us to a weak mayor system by removing the mayor's votes from the Board of Estimates and just having the Board of Estimates be the 3 elected officials like in St. Louis. The thing that I would advocate for strongly is that's got to be a huge public conversation if we're going to do that. And the reason it needs to be a huge public conversation, quite frankly, is because as somebody who just ran for and won this office, I can tell you most people in Baltimore don't seem to really understand what the comptroller does. And there are a lot of people who kind of understand what the council president does. Everybody understands the mayor is in charge. And so people pay really close attention to the mayor's election, but not as many people pay as close attention to who's running for council president and who's running for comptroller. And so if you're going to move to a system of government where the effective leader of the city is whichever two of those three people happen to agree this week, you really need to make sure that Baltimore City knew that up front when it elected all three of them.
Yeah, thank you for answering that so succinctly. And I'm looking at our other BOE questions. I think one more here, and then if there are any other kind of final questions that anyone wants to put up in the chat about anything, which is in terms of your own votes on the Board of Estimates, what are the political considerations that go into it? Knowing that, I guess part of the question is like, how much does your vote matter, and what are their political considerations for how you vote on the Board of Estimates?
Right. Okay. So the straight up truth is that technically my vote doesn't really matter, because there are 5 votes, and the mayor, the mayor, the city solicitor, and the director of public works are all going to vote the same way, whichever way that is. So since I've been on the Board of Estimates, I've been part of lots of 5-0 votes. I've been on the winning side of some 4-1 votes. I've been on the losing side of some 4-1 votes. And then there have been a couple where the mayor and his people vote one way and the council president and I both vote another. That just happened yesterday. The administration proposed new insurance rates for city workers that are going to raise the premiums for employees and retirees. The unions protested it. They brought in their financial expert to show how the city was being really very conservative in their projections, and that was why the rates were being proposed to be raised so high. And they said that they had asked the administration to work with them on a compromise, and the administration just flatly wanted to push through the rates that they'd come up with. And the council president and I both voted against that, but the mayor and his people voted for it. And so I could have voted for it because I wanted to make the mayor happy with me and marginalize the council president, but I thought that the unions had made a good case. And so one of the things that was really very annoying as a council person is when you're on the outs with the mayor, you can't get stuff done for your constituents if the mayor is mad at you and you're a council person. But as the comptroller, it's not my job to make sure that people in one council district get the constituent services they need. That's their council person's responsibility. As a comptroller, I can look at things from the perspective of what does the city need, and so I have the freedom to vote the way I think is the right way, and so that's what I do. And the political consideration I make when I'm voting is this the right thing?
One more question for you before we let you go for the evening, which is related to audits. And so it's kind of a specific question. How many agencies have not been audited since the referendum was passed? And are the agencies being audited for finances also being audited for program goals and responsiveness?
Okay, so let me do the second one first.
Okay.
Which is, we do both performance audits and financial audits of agencies right now. That's part of the requirement of the biennial audits oversight process. And frankly, we are in the process of moving away from doing the financial audits. And the reason for that is individual agencies don't actually have individual bank accounts anywhere, such that one agency could be hiding money, and that would turn up in a financial audit. The city already does a financial audit of the whole city every year as part of the CAFR, the Consolidated Annual Financial Reports. And when the city auditor was one of the people who pointed this out early. When we're doing financial audits of agencies, oftentimes agencies are creating those documents for the purpose of having them audited, because they don't use those, they don't use them because they just are spending money out of the city's general fund as it's allocated to them in the budget. It's not like they have their own bank account that they have to balance. So what we're trying to do now is move to a system where instead of doing both financial and performance audits, we can get a waiver from doing the financial ones so that we can do even more performance audits, because we have the same auditors right now split, some working on the financial and some working on the performance. And it's the performance audits that really give us the information we need to suggest and make real operational change. And at the end of the day, that's what you want from an audit. You want to see the agency being more effective and more efficient. So that's what you're going to see some of that in the news over the next couple of months as we try to move more of our auditing into the performance range. The first part of the question, are there any agencies that haven't been audited since the charter change went into effect? The answer to that is yes and no, in that the charter for the biennial audits only refers to 16 specific agencies. Now, that does include all of the big ones, but all 16 of those agencies have been audited several times now since the biennial audits charter change went into effect back in 2016. But we have been having conversations, and this was what I referred to at the beginning with the one about the water billing. We've been having conversations with the city auditor about trying to reframe their annual schedule of what audits they do. And we're trying to figure out, and this may involve having to go to the budget bureau and ask for more auditors. But I think we can make this work. I'd like to have room in the Department of Audit's capabilities to every year do a couple things that aren't part of the biennial audits calendar. For example, I'll give you one example with the school system. Technically, the state audits the school system as a whole, but they only do it like every 3 or 4 years. We technically have the authority to audit the couple $100 million that we contribute to the school system whenever we want. So, maybe work in some type of rotation where when we're on the other end of the cycle of when the state is auditing the school system, we do our own audit of the city's contribution. There are agencies of city government that aren't big, and so they didn't make the list of the 16 that are in the biennial audits. We've talked about taking all of the agencies and putting them on a separate list that we just rotate through, so that we can say everybody gets audited, not as frequently as every other year, but we're gonna see if we can work that out.
Thank you. I think we'll have to pause the conversation here, hopefully to be continued in future conversations with you. We are extremely grateful for your time this evening, for your candidness, for your PowerPoint presentation. Didn't mean to bring up old nightmares of business school. in our ask. So
I
thank
should,
you.
I should get past that. I've seen people do TED Talks that look like a lot of fun. And, you know, I should be able to do that.
The visuals were excellent. We appreciate them. You're getting lots of thank yous in the chat. And we are going to continue with a little closing on our own with our folks. Are there any other comments from any staff or leaders of this event who want to jump in? All right.
No, I think that's it. Just thank you so much, Comptroller Henry and Casey. We really appreciate you joining us tonight and educating us on so much.
Well, as always, thank you for being willing to listen to the nerdy parts of government. And whenever you have questions about the nerdy stuff city government is doing, reach out. We love to be part of that conversation.